I recently gave a talk on Fukushima here, which got me interested in this particular issue on a personal basis, obviously, because I had been exposed to some cesium and some bluefin tuna. And subsequently, I've had more of an interest in this particular subject. And as a result of that, I thought it was probably time to revisit that, although it seems like it's relatively quickly after I gave the last presentation. And I chose this particular title to attempt to get people's attention about the topic. The ongoing lessons of Fukushima and Diablo. Diablo, of course, means the devil, and I don't have Diablo Canyon nuclear plant there, but that is what implied in terms of what I'm talking about. And why I believe that Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant is the single most likely reason that life as we know it in Santa Barbara will cease to exist. And I'm going to give you some information that has come to me and at least share with you why my opinion has been shaped to this degree. I spent most of my professional life reassuring people about various issues with regard to infectious diseases, whether that be HIV infection or H1N1 infections, SARS, MRSA, various problems. And I'm here today to do something a little different because I don't really want to reassure you about this because I am genuinely concerned. And when you're genuinely concerned, what do you do with that genuine concern? Well, you can sit around and fret about it, or you can do something about it. And I feel that one of the ways to do something about it is to stand up and talk about it and at least tell you why I believe what I believe. And obviously and hopefully you will form your own opinions about that. But the key is, what are you going to do about these things? Because I believe this is a very serious situation. I would not have chosen this topic if I didn't believe it was a serious situation. So I want to take the time that we have together here and just sort of walk you through some of this information. Some of it will be a review to you. I think some of it will be new, but I just want you to hear me out and then make your own decisions, and hopefully this will stimulate you to learn more and investigate more. Well, this is the Fukushima Daiichi power plant that's in Japan, and this is a multi-reactor nuclear power plant. And if you look at this, you could be in Santa Barbara, actually. It's set right on the ocean. There's some mountains in the background here. Obviously a beautiful site. There is actually an aquifer in which there are about 400 tons of water that naturally flow under this area and into the ocean. And this site was chosen because it was convenient to be close to the ocean where water could be used, which was helpful in cooling and maintaining the temperature in the nuclear reactors in these 6 power plants that were present as part of this system. Well, all this changed approximately 3 years ago, almost to the date, when there was a perfect storm that occurred. And this perfect storm consisted of this 9.0 earthquake that cut off all the power plant from the Japanese electricity grid. And then there was a small tsunami that occurred, and then a large tsunami that was 46 feet in height that was unleashed by the earthquake, and this disabled all of the backup generators in this particular area. And the backup batteries soon failed after this. Well, these are some pictures of nature at its best, and I must say I am one of the people who loves to be out on the ocean and in the ocean, and I've had some duels with Mother Nature out there, and she hasn't won yet, but she certainly has gotten my attention in many ways. And this is a good example of what can happen with nature, and this is actually the tsunami coming over the top of the wall that had been attempted to prevent this from occurring, and actually destroying completely the wall that was there. And then you can see cars, boats that are floating by in this particular situation. Well, what happened as a result of this is because boiling water in nuclear reactors always need to have circulating water in the reactor to keep the fuel rods at a specific temperature. That's one of the ways of controlling the nuclear reaction that's there. And in fact, it's one of the ways of controlling just about any nuclear reaction, whether you're talking about an active nuclear reaction or spent fuel that's sitting around. So the earthquake triggered the shutdown, stopped the electricity, both from the power grid. The diesel generators were flooded, and this was the backup system that was supposed to keep the water flowing, to keep the reaction under control. They failed, and there were some backup batteries there that failed after about 4 to 8 hours. So essentially, let me walk you through this. This is the reactor here, and these are the control rods, which are made of boron. And what these do, these absorb neutrons, and this can actually slow the reaction down and stop it. And that actually did happen at Fukushima, that the reaction was stopped. But the problem is there's still some ongoing heat that's being generated here, and so you need the water to come in to keep this cool, because if the temperature goes up or the water should evaporate below this, you will have an ongoing nuclear reaction, which we call a nuclear bomb or a meltdown that occurs. And that's exactly what happened, is that there was a meltdown in 3 of those buildings. And this is also what happened, was there was an explosion which occurred. We don't know exactly what was released from here, but we think that there was a lot of uranium that was potentially released, at least some tritiated water, and there have been what are known as hot particles, which are very intense particles, probably containing uranium, that have been found as far as 300 miles from this particular site. And some of these distances are important to keep in mind, because I will come back to the fact that we are 90 miles away from Diablo Canyon. Again, this just shows you the reaction and how it occurs. There is actually a really thick wall of concrete around this, and there are actually several layers to protect the radiation from getting out. And this is probably the reason that we didn't really see what we usually see as a nuclear blast occurring, because the blast itself was contained in here. But the problem was the meltdown occurred, and this is generating an incredible amount of heat and energy. That's what a nuclear reaction is intended to do. What it is also intended to do is to be controlled. And at this particular time, this nuclear reaction went out of control, and as of this minute, it remains out of control. And one of the problems is, where exactly is it going and what is it doing? Well, we think it has actually made it all, it's down at the bottom of the concrete here, but what we do know is that 400 tons of aquifer water that is going beneath the nuclear power plant is being contaminated. And this just shows you what our most familiar idea of a meltdown looks like, which is called a nuclear bomb. And there was a lot of nuclear bomb testing that was done out in the South Pacific, which released massive amounts of radiation. So there were explosions in these 3 reactors. This one, fortunately, was under repair, and they were changing the fuel rods. So the spent fuel rods, it's actually unspent because there's still radioactivity in those fuel rods. They still need to be cooled. If they're not cooled or the temperature goes up, you can have another nuclear reaction here. And this nuclear reaction just happens to be sitting on the roof of this particular building, and it is not enclosed by any concrete at all. So in order to dismantle this, it's a very fragile task, which I think is occurring as we speak, but I don't really know, because there is a law of secrecy that has been passed in this Democratic Society of Japan that does not allow us to know what exactly is going on specifically with regard to this. But one thing we know for sure, there hasn't been a huge nuclear explosion that has occurred from that, and we're hopeful certainly that that doesn't occur, but that's a possibility when you're removing these fragile fuel rods from this area. This is another schematic that just shows you this is where the reactor buildings are. This is the 300 to 400 tons of aquifer that goes under the building. And as a result of the meltdown that occurs here, cool water from the Pacific Ocean is put into these buildings and then attempted to be taken out and put in these temporary storage tanks. Well, you know, you've got real double-edged sword, difficult problem here because these are temporary and they've been there for 3 years and they're falling apart and they're leaking. So all this radioactive water that's sitting here is now contaminating the aquifer. Probably the biggest problem is right here, however, where actually this corium or this meltdown that has occurred is actually contaminating this water, which is pouring into our Pacific Ocean at the rate of 400 gallons per day, and it's still doing that. And it's been doing that for 3 years, and it's probably going to continue to do that for at least 2, 3, or 4 decades. Yes, Steve?
It's 400 tons of water.
You're right, it is 400 tons of water. That is a misprint. Thank you for that correction. But the point is, I don't know what the difference between 400 gallons and 400 tons of radiation is because it's more than I can comprehend. And the key point here is there's an awful lot of radioactivity that's going into my Pacific Ocean out there. And I say my Pacific Ocean, it's your Pacific Ocean too. And of course we use it how we want. But it's one of the places and one of the reasons that I enjoy living in Santa Barbara is because I felt very safe going out in it, except last weekend, of course, when the waves were a little too high for me anyway. But those are the chances that we can choose to take as opposed to the risk that may be imposed upon us. So what's the problem with this radioactive waste? Well, it just doesn't go away. You can't just put it in the garbage can and have Marburg come by and pick it up and take it somewhere and have it go away. It has to be continuously maintained because it can last for thousands of years. It retains its toxicity. There's no safe dosage of this, and the toxic effects are cumulative, and it's continuously pouring into the Pacific Ocean unabated. And this has an effect, I believe, on our fragile ecosphere every day, and will do so for decades to come. So what's happening in the Fukushima prefecture? Well, you can see here, these are areas that have been evacuated. And just envision, as I have done, if your home was significantly contaminated by radiation, that you had to be evacuated. And if you had to be evacuated and it was indeed contaminated, you're not going to be able to go back to that home. And you still have a mortgage payment on that home, all your personal belongings are in that home, but you cannot return to that area. And if you do return to that area, you don't really know what the consequences of that are going to potentially be in terms of these hot particles of radiation around, water that's contaminated, or other problems. And this is what is going on right now in Japan. There are a lot of people who have been displaced, about 150,000 that have been displaced, and have no idea of when they're going to be able to go back to their homes. Cesium levels have been very, very high in a lot of the reservoirs around Fukushima. I wonder what it would be like if Kachuma Lake, presuming we still have a Kachuma Lake in the near future, reservoir is contaminated with cesium, our natural water supply, and how that would affect us or impact us. Thyroid cancers in Fukushima. We know that I-131 has a particular predilection for going to the thyroid, and they have been screening children in Japan very vigorously in an attempt to identify this. The normal prevalence of or incidence of thyroid cancer is 1 to 2 people aged 10 to 14 per million in Japan. In the last 3 years, there have been 115 per million cases in Fukushima. Imagine taking your children in to be continually tested to see whether or not they had thyroid cancer or some other problem that may or may not have been occurring. These show some children who are being tested for radiation, and of course this just detects superficial radiation. It doesn't detect radiation that has been ingested. He looks like he's being held up for all the money he has. This is a child getting an ultrasound. They've developed some specialized ultrasound techniques to detect thyroid cancer. And in addition to thyroid cancer, there's a lot of thyroiditis which has occurred as well. You know, thyroiditis, that's something that we can take care of. We know how to replace hypothyroidism and give thyroid medicines to people, but there are other consequences as well of this radioactivity.
Is Hashimoto's?
I'm sorry?
Is Hashimoto's?
Hashimoto's is really autoimmune thyroiditis, and this is a different kind of thyroiditis than that. And if certainly people are starting to protest, you want to evacuate your children from Fukushima, I would have difficulty evacuating my children from Santa Barbara, although I must say when they were teenagers I would consider it. I certainly would be impacted significantly if that would occur. This was something that was just in the last couple of weeks. Fish caught off of the coast of Fukushima are radiated. The expression on the announcer's face is pretty much what mine looked like when I realized I had eaten some contaminated bluefin tuna. And in actuality, this was just reported a couple of weeks ago, but it's actually been happening for 3 years, which speaks again to the information that we don't really know about what truly is happening and raises the question of why we don't know that. Well, what happens with radioactivity? Uranium-235 is one of the naturally occurring radioactive substances. It releases neutrons from itself spontaneously. When you put this uranium together very closely, you have an increased chance of the neutrons running into another uranium. And what happens is it breaks down and you get these other substances that are released that have a smaller atomic number with release of a huge amount of heat that occurs with that. And some of these that are released that we know about are strontium. This is the bone seeker. It goes directly to bone and it can be associated with leukemia. Curiously enough, I was talking to one of the oncologists in town about a year or so ago, remarking on how much myelodysplastic syndrome that I had been seeing over the last 3 to 5 years, and I just didn't understand why I was seeing people. Myelodysplastic syndrome is an impaired bone marrow. What's normally made by the bone marrow is made in a very sort of erratic, irregular way, and it can predispose to developing leukemia. And makes me have reconsidered where that myelodysplastic syndrome may be coming from, although I have not seen that as a direct consequence of strontium anyway. Cesium goes to muscle and can cause problems with muscle. There have actually been some studies reported from Japan suggesting cardiomyopathy as a result of cesium exposure. And I think about all those folks that we get admitted who think may have alcoholic cardiomyopathy, and they probably do, and then the ones who don't drink alcohol, and we don't know why they have that cardiomyopathy occurring. Cesium is like potassium as well. And then iodine, certainly. I mentioned the issue about thyroid cancer, I-131. Most people know that you can take iodine and that hopefully will block some of the absorption of iodine. Now, you need to take the extra iodine when you're being exposed to it. It doesn't really help a whole lot after you've been exposed to it, and it pretty much goes away pretty quickly because it's got a half-life of about 8 days. So we need to take it for about a month. Some of these other things you would need to take for a longer period of time because they have a half-life of about 30 years that occurs. The effects of the radiation and how does this do what it does? Well, ionizing radiation really means it knocks electrons off of these atoms. And when you have a free radical, I look at this and I smile at this every time because when having grown up in the 60s and 70s, when I think about a free radical, I think about the Weathermen and I think about SDS and I think about the Black Panthers as the free radicals who weren't always free since they were being put in jail a lot. But what happens is these atoms want to go and want to do things, want to attach to proteins and destroy cells. They can destroy DNA, the building blocks that we have. And as a result of these reactions that occur, you can get massive cell death if you have a huge exposure in what's normally affected, the gastrointestinal tract, the bone marrow, and over a longer period of time, other things can be affected. You can have cancer development, and you can have, obviously, genetic mutations occurring. Well, so what is the news about our planet? I put this up here because, you know, I must say I don't really follow the news that closely, but since I've been doing this, everything that has to do with radiation or radioactivity seems to pop up on my computer one way or the other. Well, there have been some current concerns recently raised about the nuclear waste tanks at Hanford, and that's the site in Washington of the storage of all the radioactive waste products from World War II. And this is a very large area where they're actually finding radioactivity leaking. About 2/3 of all the radioactivity in the United States is stored here, and it tends to be leaking. And this just happens to be the Columbia River, which is going next to it. Here's the Columbia Dam, which, oh, by the way, they found a big crack in a couple of weeks ago, and there's some troubles there as well. These rare conjoined gray whale calves have been discovered recently down in Mexico, and radiation tends to affect rapidly growing tissue, as you see in the fetus or our young children. There's some speculation that this may have occurred, and again, I don't know this has occurred, but it's curious that it did occur recently as a result of exposure of these whales to some radiation. I don't know that, but it's, again, one of the concerns. There's also mystery surrounding the massive die-off of oysters and scallops up in British Columbia. Sardines sort of disappeared last year. We don't know where these sea life are going anyway. There was also a fair amount of large animals that were accumulating on the west coast, up in Monterey Bay. Unclear what that was about. Some have explained this because concentrations of whales that just had intuitively knew that there was something bad coming. Again, it's hard to know what happened, but there's some strange things that are happening out in the Pacific Ocean that I think we just don't yet understand. Radiation from the Fukushima nuclear plant has reached offshore Canada. This was recently reported February 25th at the annual American Geophysical Union's Ocean Sciences meeting in Honolulu. There were two radioactive cesium isotopes detected, cesium-134 and cesium-137. We have cesium-137 with us as a result of the above-ground nuclear testing that was done out in the South Pacific. Cesium-134 has a much shorter half-life of 2 years. And so the fact that that's there, this is the marker that the radiation is actually coming from Fukushima. So we know that the water has reached the West Coast, and of course we're just downstream from there, and we'll be seeing this soon. We have been reassured that this is low doses, nothing to worry about so far. And there is a project now looking at how radioactive our ocean is, and these are different sites that are being tested. There is also another group here in town that are looking at the kelp because that tends to focus and concentrate radioactivity. And these are all grassroots organizations. They're looking for money and support because there is not a lot of federal money. I would probably say there's not any federal money that's being brought to us to help do this sort of surveillance. Another thing that popped up that I thought was really interesting was the whole story about the radioactive fertilizer and this polonium-210, which is in fertilizer that gets into tobacco, which when you smoke it, of course, it gets aerosolized and put in the lung. And this is the only component of cigarette smoke which has been found to produce cancer in laboratory animals. And it may not have been the tobacco itself, but actually this radioactivity that's in the tobacco that is responsible for this. But this is still being researched at this time, but another interesting sort of sidelight about this. Well, the Obama administration is planning on building a couple of nuclear reactors in Georgia right now. Despite all this happening, but beside despite the concern that many people have about nuclear power plants and the danger that they hold. There have not been any new nuclear power plants for about 30 years, and the fact that they could be considering doing this in the face of what we're learning from Fukushima doesn't really compute for me. And it's certainly, I would not want to have a nuclear power plant in my backyard. In fact, I actually don't want to have one 90 miles up the coast from me either, which is part of the reason I'm here talking. They've also had a leak from this waste isolation pilot plant just outside of Carlsbad, New Mexico. It was an underground place to put the radioactivity, thought a pretty safe place to keep it, but they think that there was a big stalactite which was released and ruptured some of the barrels of radioactivity there, and there was significant exposure to about 20 of the workers who were there. So even when we put this stuff underground, you can't be sure it's not going to affect people. Another interesting, there was some Jefferson bottles of wine that were thought to be owned and made by Thomas Jefferson. And of course, you don't want to open these things up to find out whether or not they are, to test them. So what some imaginative scientist has done has looked for any cesium-137, which you can do without opening the bottle. There was no cesium-137 on this planet until we started doing nuclear testing. This substance is anthropogenic, meaning that we made it, or it was a result of human endeavors anywhere. So anything that was made back in the time of Jefferson would have zero background radioactivity from cesium or iodine. Just to let you know that there is radioactivity out there. One of the things I've been astonished about, that there is so much background radiation, but the more you think about it with all the nuclear testing that was done, it actually makes perfect sense. So this is a nuclear fallout map over the Pacific in days after explosion at the Fukushima, and you can certainly see that we got exposed down here. There's an interesting study done looking at congenital hypothyroidism that increased significantly in the 5 states that were on the previous slide right here during that, after that period of time, suggesting the exposure to I-131 did something to those children who were in utero, which again, in utero and young children that where rapidly dividing tissues are, and they're at greatest risk for exposure to radiation. This will come back in a second. Again, the bluefin tuna is still infected with cesium, so I'm still staying away from bluefin tuna. I've been checking, and the salmon is still okay, so I'm still ingesting that for the moment, but I'm keeping a radioactive eye on that in case it starts to turn up there. This is just what happens to the tuna when they come over to visit us. So our most basic common link is that we all inhabit this small planet, we all breathe the same air, we all cherish our children's futures, and we're all mortal. Which brings me to the Diablo Canyon report, which was just released on Monday. This was commissioned by Jerry Brown, who is director of the Safe Energy Project for the World Business Academy. And this is Diablo Canyon. Actually, it almost looks like you could be in Fukushima here. You can see it's built right on the ocean, slanting some mountains in the background, nuclear reactors, and there's some storage pools for the unspent nuclear fuel here, and up here a little bit higher. This is a map which shows where previous tsunamis have struck the west coast, which is relatively interesting because here's Diablo Canyon, and here where these tsunamis have struck the coast. The plant was constructed in the 1970s, and it is certainly and unequivocally not fit for withstanding a huge earthquake, which some people are predicting are going to occur. Of course, they're always predicting they're going to occur, but probably one will occur, and we just don't know when that's going to happen. So I think there clearly is some potential risk for this to occur. And this just shows when if a major accident would happen, where the wind blows, and you can see the wind blows directly downwind, and I think this is Campus Point about right here, and that's where I paddleboard now, but before down at Ledbetter Beach, we used to go windsurfing there, and because that was one of the best places in Santa Barbara because the winds we know would come from the north down right there. Anyway, so I certainly believe that this is the way the wind is likely to blow. And, Diablo Canyon released more liquid tritium into the environment than any other U.S. nuclear plant in recent years. You know, that wind is still blowing towards us, by the way, and we're getting exposed to it. And you know what? We don't know that because you can't smell it, you can't taste it. You don't know that it's coming your way. And it's illegal to do this, by the way, which I must say I wasn't aware of until I actually read this report. And this is how large a nuclear disaster. You can see this is what the patterns of spread of nuclear radiation was after Fukushima, and that's just superimposed on here. And once again, you can see the winds coming this way, and we will be in the path of this should there be a meltdown at Diablo Canyon. So the Diablo Canyon report, basically there's a lot of radioactivity there, more than was at the Chernobyl disaster. There is a fault that runs right through there. And oh, by the way, the levels of strontium in children's teeth born in the late 1990s have increased significantly. That's that bone seeker radioactive material that is released as a result of nuclear reactivity. This actually shows President Kennedy signing the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. And I'm going to read this just because it means a lot to me anyway. The number of children and grandchildren with cancer in their bones, with leukemia in their blood, or with poison in their lungs might seem statistically small to some in comparison with natural health hazards. But this is not a natural health hazard, and it is not a statistical issue. The loss of even one human life or the malformation of even one baby who may be born long after we are gone should be of concern to all of us. Our children and our grandchildren are not merely statistics toward which we can be indifferent. And this is a take-home message for me, and part of the reason, again, that I'm standing here this moment. Well, this shows the average strontium in U.S. baby teeth. They actually did a tooth fairy study that looked at the amounts of strontium that were in teeth. It was actually as a result of this rising amount of strontium in baby teeth that was one of the major reasons that President Kennedy signed the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. And so these levels of strontium went down, nuclear power plants expanded dramatically, and then what do we have from there is that the levels of strontium in the teeth go back up again, just as an epidemiologic piece of information. The average strontium in California also rose as well in baby teeth. And this was a study by the National Academy of Sciences that basically said that the risk of cancer proceeds with any exposure to radiation, and essentially there is no safe dose of radiation. This shows the zip codes around Diablo Canyon nuclear plant, and these are the major findings. San Luis Obispo County has changed from a low cancer to a high cancer county. The cancer incidence rose significantly, and currently the cancer rate in San Luis Obispo County is the highest of all 20 counties in Southern California. And this just shows you the cancer incidence there compared to the cancer incidence of there during these specific times, and it clearly has gone up dramatically. There have been rapid increases in thyroid and female breast cancer in San Luis. Infant mortality rose significantly. Remember, those infants are very susceptible to radiation. Child and adolescent cancer mortality rose as well, and the incidence of melanoma increased dramatically, 130% up. Don't really understand exactly what that means, but certainly those showers of tritium that are out there are landing on my skin and your skin, and when we're out there in the sun, this needs to be evaluated further. There's an increased incidence of low birth weight babies, and all-cause mortality rose as well, and there's also increased incidence of low birth weight infants in Santa Barbara County. and total mortality in zip codes that are located closer to the reactor. After the Rancho Seco reactor was shut down, childhood cancer rates in the surrounding areas dropped dramatically, which we would all hope for. So current rate of cancer leads all 20 counties, especially breast, thyroid, melanoma, and increases in infant mortality, child adolescent cancer rates, and infants with very low birth weight. Once again, Diablo Canyon released more liquid tritium into the environment than any other U.S. nuclear plant. This is where it is, and again, these are the spent fuel reservoirs up here, and the potential for a perfect storm is with us. We don't know when this is going to happen, if it's going to happen, but we know that there have been earthquakes in Southern California before, and I believe it's really a matter of time before the next one occurs. So the only logical solution in my mind is to close the Diablo Canyon nuclear plant and secure the radioactive waste. And when I say secure the radioactive waste, it means we need to get it out of there. We can't leave it there, because you leave it there in those pools, the spent fuel pools, they still need to be cooled. So we need to get them away from any danger. Where that away is, I don't know exactly. But we need to get it away from the ocean and probably someplace where it's less likely to be at risk. Well, there's still those around who would reopen and build more nuclear power plants. The authorities in Japan actually want to reopen the 50 nuclear reactors that have been shut down as a result of the Fukushima incident, which boggles my mind, the fact that those folks have gone through this and they're still lobbying. The authorities there are still lobbying to reopen this. It boggles my mind that we are loaning money to build new reactors in Georgia and looking at some other ones in Mississippi. It's hard for me to believe, knowing what I know, knowing what I've explained to you, that that is actually on the horizon. Einstein said, "A foolish faith in authority is the worst enemy of the truth." And I think I learned when I was in college and looking at going to Vietnam that my faith in authority went away at that time. And I think we all question it on some level, one way or the other. It's really a matter of when do you need to be stand up and counted. This is Vivian Haar. She's 8 years old, and I recently found out about her. This is a lemonade stand that she calls it her Make a Stand lemonade. She found out that half of the folks who were involved in human trafficking or human slavery were children, and she was upset about this, and she decided she wanted to do something. She started a lemonade stand. What are you going to do with a lemonade stand? She was getting $1 for her lemonade, and so she decided to raise the price, say you can pay whatever you want. She got a few $100 bills from that. Somebody found out about this, and they're now marketing her lemonade. In the last year, over $1 million has been raised and put in to help with getting rid of human trafficking. Well, I think this just gives hope that each and every one of us in our own way can do whatever we need to do. I had the good fortune of meeting Sawada, who's a Buddhist monk, on Monday, and then again Tuesday morning before he began his peace walk. And in talking to him, it was absolutely amazing because he is sweet, he's kind, he's gentle, and when I would talk to him, he would hold both of my hands in his hands, and he would look me in the eye, and I felt like I was looking into the eyes of an infant because I could look into him, and there was no block. It was just he and I were there together, and I thanked him for what he was doing, and I asked him why he was doing this, and he told me so that what happened to my family does not happen to yours. Well, my son lives about 3 miles from Diablo Canyon. And I live here in Santa Barbara, and I appreciate everything that Santa Barbara has to offer, from the ocean to the mountains to the incredible food, vegetables that we have available to us. And I can see the possibility of that being taken away from us. Even if there is not a perfect storm, the Diablo Canyon reactor is still releasing radioactivity into the air that gets into the water, that gets into the food supply, that gets into the ground that we're breathing in. And I come back again to JFK, who said, "Today every inhabitant of this planet must contemplate the day when this planet may no longer be inhabitable. Every man, woman, and child lives under a nuclear sword of Damocles, hanging by the slenderest of threads, capable of being cut at any moment by accident or miscalculation or madness." And I look at what's going on in Ukraine and what our response to that is, and it makes me shudder. The weapons of war must be abolished before they abolish us. The weapons of war are also the fuel of nuclear power plants and must likewise be abolished before they abolish us. So, what are we to do? How do we go from here? I hope that you walk out of here and you have an increased understanding of at least why I am compelled to do whatever I can possibly do to deal with this, stop this, to educate myself. And here are some places where you can go and get some information and get some education. At the recent meeting at the United Nations Association of Santa Barbara, one of the Mothers for Peace, and if you want to get something done, get a mother riled up and you will get it done. And I was assured that in the next 3 to 4 months there were going to be some significant political, social, and grassroots activities that were going to occur. On Tuesday, Sawada, who's walking 20 miles a day to get to Diablo Canyon, will arrive there, and there will be a prayer vigil from 8 in the morning till 4 in the evening, and there will be another meeting up there at 7 o'clock at night where there is a showing of the movie called Mothers of Fukushima. I think it's time that we all look at what's going on around us. It's time that we wake up. It's time that we increase our consciousness and do whatever we can in whatever way to talk to other people about this and do something about it before it's too late. Thank you all for listening.